Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Garfinkel. I am the Membership and Programs Manager here with the Connecticut League of History Organizations, Connecticut League of Museums. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. Once again, we are joined by the lovely and helpful Connecticut Humanities Grants team, who is going to dedicate the next hour or so providing information on upcoming grant opportunities and where that might make sense for you. So we are very excited to have this opportunity available to all of you today. Just as a few quick housekeeping things, as I mentioned, this will be recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. And for all of you who are registered, expect to receive a follow-up email from us as well, which will provide all of the resources talked about in today's presentation, as well as a link to the recording. One other note to mention as well is that this is sort of part one in a grants helping series provided by Connecticut Humanities. On October 3rd, also at 12 p.m., we will also be hosting a Grant Writing 101 session, which will be announced very soon. So expect to receive a event registration link for that as well. And that will be sort of more of the nuts and bolts on how to craft the actual grant writing process as you go. So feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we go. Myself and our executive director, Amherst Williams, who is here, will be sort of in the background monitoring the chat, trying to address questions as they come up. There will also be time for a Q&A at the end. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to our director, Amherst. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And thanks so much for doing all the work on the back end to get this set up. There's an enormous amount of effort that goes into these virtual programs that have become so seamless to us. And I want to thank the folks at Connecticut Humanities and Emily for putting this together and doing all of the administrative stuff that makes these things possible. I just wanted to say a couple of words about the work that we at the League are trying to do to support connecting all of you with funding opportunities. As Emily mentioned, we're collaborating with Connecticut Humanities to provide guidance on their grant lines and tips on successful grant applications. And Emily's mentioned an upcoming workshop on that. And as part of our efforts also to increase your capacity at your organizations, we're also having conversations with the National Endowment for the Humanities right now about planning a couple of webinars, hopefully which will take place in September, offering an overview to applying for NEH grants and what that process entails and looks like, as well as a follow-up program that will identify a handful of grant lines that are especially well suited to smaller organizations. I know a lot of us think of the federal grants process, and it can be kind of overwhelming. And so what we're trying to work with NEH to kind of give a leg up and some advice to organizations who may be contemplating applying for a federal grant like that for the first time. So you can watch your emails for further announcements about that. Again, we're hoping those will take place next month. Without further ado, I want to hand things over to the grant staff at Connecticut Humanities. We have with us today three folks who will hopefully be familiar to many of you and will be familiar to you soon if you aren't already familiar with them. We have the Scott Wands, who's the Deputy Director for Grants and Programs at Grants and Programs at Connecticut Humanities. Everybody's changing titles lately, getting great promotions, etc. Lian Partridge, who's the Grants Manager at Connecticut Humanities, and Becky Vitkauskas, who is the Grants Assistant. We work closely with these folks, going out on site visits, talking about grant opportunities and membership opportunities. So it's great to work with them on this program. Without further ado, I'll hand things over to Scott, who will kick things off for us. Scott.
Thank you, Amherst, and thank you, Emily, and thank you for everyone at the Connecticut League for hosting us today, giving us this forum to reach so many faces here. I'm glad so many people signed up. We had over 200 folks register to be here today. I know some of you will watch it afterwards. I like to think I'll be compelling enough that if you watch this in your evening hours, it'll be worth your time. But I do want to start off on that vein and saying, if you are a regular grant applicant to our project grants, quick grants, planning grants, implementation grants, capacity grants, This is probably not the right hour of your time because we're going to be really doing this more for folks that are newer to us, new to an organization, maybe some organizations that received CT Cultural Fund operating support grants from us and are wondering what other types of funding Connecticut Humanities has available. Then you are in the right place. But if you've gotten quick grants, multiple quick grants, big grants from us, this hour really is more on an introduction to our grant lines that you are probably more familiar with than not, and possibly could be our advocates out in the field to others. So just wanted to make that clear before people felt like, oh my God, what did I just do with my last hour of my life? Want to just give you a little bit of run of show here. I'm going to talk for a little bit about who we are at Connecticut Humanities, and a little bit about the funding landscape this year. I'm going to pass it over to Lian, who's going to really go more into what the humanities are and the types of projects and things we'd be looking for in the grant lines to come. We'll have a brief break for questions, and then we're going to break into with Becky talking about some of our individual grant lines and giving quick overviews of them. Want to talk about what's forthcoming a little bit, but also leave ample time for questions and answers at the end here. So just briefly from my part here, what is Connecticut Humanities? We are a 501c3 organization. We are not a state agency. We're not a federal agency, although we work closely with both. We are actually the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Back more than 50 years ago, the federal government set up a National Endowment for the Arts and a National Endowment for the Humanities. They have organizations at the statewide level across the country and across their territories doing this work for them. In Connecticut, the NEA has the Office of the Arts, and they provide arts funding. In Connecticut, for the humanities side, we are the affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we help Connecticut citizens really understand what's going on in our world today, where we've come from, where we're going, and we explore and help communities, organizations, and citizens explore things like history, civics, not arts for presentation's sake, but arts for art, history, and criticism and sake. So we'll get more into that with Lian's side of things. We do a number of different things. We're going to be talking about grants today, and this is the grants team at Connecticut Humanities. But other projects that we will not be talking about today include our digital history work. We maintain ConnecticutHistory.org, which is an online encyclopedia of Connecticut history, topics, places, people. We maintain Teach It CT, which is a resource to take Connecticut's history and connect it to educators and places and primary and secondary resources. We do some literature-based programs through our Connecticut Center for the Book. Oh, someone is sharing screen. Thank you. And literature-based programs like Book Voyagers. I'm happy to talk more offline about any of those, and you can go to cthumanities.org and learn about all the different activities we do. But really, today we're going to be talking about grants. And just one thing for the funding landscape. I know many of you may have come to us recently because of the Connecticut Cultural Fund. We're not going to be doing an advocacy session today, but we've been communicating over the last few weeks and months that this was not funded by the CT legislature, at least for the current state fiscal year, which runs from July 1 of this year to June 30th of next year. We are working hard behind the scenes to get this funding back to be able to provide operating support grants like we did to over 700 organizations last year. This is not the right time for a full court press. Many of our legislators are in campaign mode, not for themselves, but for municipal elections, which will be upcoming this fall. We will let you know when the right time is. That said, we encourage you to continue to make strong relationships with your state house rep, your state senator, and if you have opportunities to let them know about your displeasure about this funding not being available at this time, what impact it'll have on your organization, please do so. And again, we'll do more of a full court press in the coming months when it is the right time. But it is never the wrong time to start good relationships with your legislators and let them know about what issues matter to you and the impact the funding had, and we'll have when it goes away. We do have funding that is available for this year, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Connecticut Humanities receives a line item appropriation in the state budget to help the state do the work of the humanities in our communities. We grant out $637,000 this year, and that's what's going to be coming through the grant lines, the quick grants, the planning grants, the capacity, and such that Lian and Becky are going to be talking about next. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Lian to tell a little bit more about what the kinds of stuff are that we do fund.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be giving some general information about what Connecticut Humanities funds before we get into our specific grant lines. We do have a lot of information, but I will also be sharing my screen and showing you on our website where you can be reviewing this information, so don't feel like you have to get it all in the first time. So the first thing I want to talk about is Connecticut Humanities. We're your Humanities Council, and that means that we primarily fund public humanities projects. So I kind of wanted to go over what are the humanities to make sure that we all have the same understanding of what generally Connecticut Humanities funds. So let me share my screen. All right. So on our website, we do have a resource called What Are the Humanities? You can find it under our work and What Are the Humanities? Generally, we describe the humanities as any subject areas that help us to better understand who we are as humans, our communities, anything that helps us to better understand human history, culture, values, beliefs. We have a list of fields of learning that are generally considered under the humanities, and that's not to say that this is a finite list, but it's essentially to kind of help you with connecting your project or for brainstorming what might be considered the humanities. The humanities touches a lot of other disciplines as well. Things we often see are connections between the arts and humanities or STEM and the humanities. And so when we're talking about a project that might touch the arts and humanities, just to help us kind of determine where the humanities might be in that project, it tends to be what helps us to better understand the themes of the art. So for example, if there's any interpretation or contextualization that's happening around a piece of art, that's typically going to be the humanities. Some examples might be if you are putting on a play. The play itself is the creation of art, whether that's the writing of the play or the performing of the play. But if you're having a talkback where you're going to be talking about some major themes that were explored through the play, that's going to be the humanities. Another example might be if you're having a concert, that would be art. So if you are writing music or performing music, that's considered the arts. But if you're going to be talking about the significance of a particular composer or style of music to our culture or our history, that's going to be the humanities. So that's something that we as grant staff are always happy to kind of talk through with you. If you say, I have a project, I'm not really sure if this is a humanities project, we can talk through it with you and just help you to identify where the humanities might be in the project, or if we think really this is not the best fit for us as a humanities council, we can kind of talk through that with you. But I wanted to make sure we're all aware that we have this resource here as well. And we have some videos as well that can help you to kind of explore a little bit more of what humanities topics or themes might be. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about our grants application process. And you can find a little bit more about that under grants, and grant application process is one of the first ones up here. Typically, our grants can only be made directly to organizations that are 501c3 nonprofits that are incorporated in Connecticut, to municipalities in Connecticut, or to federally or state recognized tribes. So what that means is if you are an individual or if you are not a nonprofit organization, we cannot make a grant directly to you, but you can partner with other organizations that are eligible. And we can talk about funding through a partnership with an eligible organization or through a fiscal sponsor. We just cannot work directly with, for example, if you are a filmmaker, we would not be able to grant directly to you. So looking at the grants process, we have here kind of some information that you can read or download. This is something that you're able to print if that's a way that is easier for you to take in some information. The grant submission process typically starts with contacting grant staff. So we will be sharing our contact information at the end of this session. It is a requirement for all of our grant lines that you reach out to us. And the reason that we require this is that it helps us to be able to talk through your project, help you to see what might be the strongest elements to highlight, help you to see what deadlines you might want to target or what grant lines might be the best fit for you. And sometimes if we see your project might not be competitive for a grant line, we kind of want to save you that work too, so that you don't go through the whole grant application process only to be disappointed at the end. So that's why we really require that you contact us to discuss your project before applying. We recommend that you reach out to us at least 3 weeks before the grant deadline, because that allows you to really work through this whole process where we can set up a grant consultation, preferably over Zoom, so that we can really discuss your project with you. You'll draft your application, and then we'll go through a draft review. This is not a requirement, the draft review, but it's something that we really strongly recommend, because we might have this great conversation, and then when we read your application, we realize there's this major theme, or there's something you mentioned that was really compelling that wasn't mentioned in your application. So this is really where we can think from the reviewer perspective and help to point out some questions they might have, or help to point out something you mentioned that seems to be missing, or look through your budget and say, maybe you misunderstood the budget document and we don't want you to be disqualified on a technicality. Here's our chance to catch that before you submit your application. So draft reviews, we ask for about 2 weeks ahead of your grant deadline that you submit for a draft review, which is why we say minimum of 3 weeks before the deadline is the ideal time to be reaching out to us. Feel free to reach out much more in advance, but this is really the minimum recommendation. You'll submit your application, and from there it goes to the application review committee. We have more information on this page on what the application review process looks like, but ultimately at the end, we will give you a phone call and an email to let you know whether your application has been approved or denied. If it was denied, we do talk through some of the feedback from the committee and whether they would recommend applying again. So we try to make this as helpful as a process for you and your project. If you are approved, we also have some steps of what happens after that. And I won't go through that in this webinar, but that's something that we will walk through with you at this point as well. So that is generally the life cycle of a grant process, of what it looks like from your idea through application with us. A few other things I wanted to touch on is that we also have some funding priorities, which you will see under grants here as well. These funding priorities might also help you to see if your project might be a really good fit for us, if you're kind of considering a couple different funders. Our funding priorities are listed here, but primarily all projects that are most prioritized are projects that have significant humanities scholarship, which means you have involvement of humanities experts. They don't necessarily need to be academics, but they do need to be people who are subject area experts in the humanities fields that you're exploring, or that have significant lived experience to talk about those fields that you're exploring. There are also projects that talk about topics and stories in an inclusive, diverse, and equitable manner. So this is a resource that is linked on all of our grant pages that you can read through at your leisure, but I do want to highlight that we have these funding priorities that can help you to identify which of your projects might be maybe the best fit to approach us with. And again, this is something we can talk through with you as well, but there is a resource on our website for this. We're going to be talking through in a minute, and I'll take a little break for questions, as I know this is a lot of information, but we will be talking through all of our main grant lines, which you will see here, and we will go through this page in more detail. But one question that we frequently get is, how many grants can I apply for at once? Can I have more than one grant at the same time? And the answer is yes. You can have one grant in each grant line at the same time, with the only exception being planning and implementation. These are considered from the same funding source, so you can only have one of these at a time. But you could have one quick grant, one planning or implementation grant, one capacity grant, one sponsorship, your Connecticut Cultural Fund operating support grant. These are things you can have at the same time. So as you're considering, what might I want to go for, that's an important consideration for eligibility as well. all of our grant pages have more information that we'll go through, including guidelines. And that's what maybe the biggest thing that we would highlight, is that it's really important that you read through the guidelines and just make sure that your project is a good fit for the grant, or doesn't run against some of the funding exclusions, so that it's something that we can fund as your State Humanities Council. So with that, I would just like to take a break for some questions before we delve more deeply into these grant lines. If there are any general questions about what Connecticut Humanities funding looks like, or our grants programs look like.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Lian, that there was one question that came through that came just to me. Are independent schools able to apply for grants?
So if a school is a 501c3 or they are a municipal school, that they could be applying either with their 501c3 status or as part of the town. If they are some other way organized, then we would need to have a conversation, and that's where fiscal sponsorship would be needed. There's a couple more questions coming in here. We'll go in order of what I'm seeing. So Storytelling Center is asking about, can you have more than one grant at the same time for the same project? By and large, the answer is no, unless they are completely different parts of the same project. So for one example, you could come in and receive an implementation grant for a major exhibit and not any of the programming, and then augment that at a later time with a quick grant while that implementation grant is still going for the exhibit, to do the programming to supplement and talk about that exhibit and the content and the themes that you want to explore through programs. But you would not be able to get a quick grant to do more of the same exact work that you're already being funded in some other way through us at Connecticut Humanities through a project grant. If you're doing that work through a cultural fund grant and part of your operating support, we should have a conversation. You can't ask for us to fund the same dollar activity 2 different times, but we can support your operations with a project grant separate from that, yes.
The next question was, how are deadlines set? You'll see the deadlines on the next page that we talk about, but we have quick grant deadlines 4 times a year, sponsorship deadlines 4 times a year, and capacity implementation and planning deadlines twice a year. The dates are all on our website. They are the first Fridays of a month. For the ones that are twice a year, it's always going to be November and April. The 4 times a year ones we'll talk about when we look at them, as they're different from each other. And we announce them the year ahead so that you have time to plan for those deadlines coming up.
Looking at Wayne's question here about the approximate percentage of grants that are for nonprofit organizations that have been established for 2 or plus more years. Well, we have basic eligibility requirements that an organization needs to be a 501c3 for at least a year, so that there are a period of performance that's there that you can be giving us information about and budget information about to be eligible. But we don't segregate our funds for project funds for like organizations that are newer versus older. We are always trying to make sure that in any given round of grants, we're taking into consideration not just funding the biggest organizations that have professional grant writing staff and paid staff in general, or that all of our grants are going to one geographic part of the state or another. So we're trying to be equitable in distributing our funds from institution type, capacity, size, geography, and a variety of different other things, so that our funding is really representative of the state of Connecticut in the projects that are happening across the state. How many grants are received and reviewed in a fiscal year? All right, so we'll talk 2 different things here, because if you talk all of our grants, it's been a ridiculously crazy era of grant making with operating support grants where we were literally getting over 800 applications, running CT Summer at the museum for those organizations that are museums where we're getting 130 plus applications. So we've been receiving well over 1,000 grants across all of our grant lines in a given year. But for the ones we're talking about today, in terms of competitiveness here, we get somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 120 quick grant submissions a year, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 at the most capacity grant submissions a year, somewhere in the neighborhood of at the most 30 to 40 planning and implementation grant submissions combined. And we have evaluation reports on our website. We can link to it later that have looked at our granting program over time. And we talk about the success rate of different grant lines. Quick grants typically end up having a little bit higher success rate. You end up being in the 60, 66%, 3 out of 5, 2 out of 3 grants get funded, should funding be available. Planning implementation capacity a little bit less than that. It gets closer to the 50% grant line success rate. But still, if you compare Connecticut Humanities grants to federal grants, we hopefully have a much easier, streamlined process and a much higher success rate, where some of those federal grant line programs have like 18% success rate or less.
Isabel asked if we help individuals connect with fiscal sponsors. That's something you can reach out to us at grants@connecticuthumanities.org. That is, if it's a subject area that we know of someone who's eligible to come to us for a grant for, we can kind of connect you with that. You don't have to be a humanities organization to apply to us. You just have to be a 501c3 incorporated in Connecticut, a municipal organization, or a tribal organization. So, if you have a community foundation, for example, who's going to come in on your behalf, even if they're not humanities focused, they would be eligible, and we can try to help match you up.
Want to take a few more of these, but I also know I want to leave time for Becky, so maybe we'll do 2 more here. I have a question about if you've been turned down for a grant, can you reapply? The short answer is yes, but we will be working with our committee so that the information we share with you before you resubmit gives you confidence that if you resubmit and there are a few things that the committee didn't know or had questions on, or you could provide more detail about, and that would be likely to be successful in a resubmit, then we would encourage you and work with you on that. But everything we do as a staff here and as a granting program is not to waste your time as an applicant, waste our committee's time. That's why we ask you to talk to us about your grants before you submit. We want everyone to have the best chance of success and not feel frustrated at the end of the day. So especially before someone resubmits, we want to talk to them about, is there a good likelihood that if you tweak some things, you're going to be successful and not even more frustrated having been turned down a second time. And then the next question, I guess the last one we'll do for right now from Catherine is, are new grantees prioritized all, or are those applicants who are not applicants under multiple times? Yes. So we are taking into consideration everything that's put forth here. We let our grant committee know this is a first-time applicant. This is someone who got a cultural fund for us and now is coming to us for a different project. They did museum makeover. They did a collections assessment. We as staff give a background on our relationship with the grantee in this project and the path that they've been having. And our committee takes all these things into consideration. And we want to make sure that we're funding strong humanities projects with good scholarship first and foremost. But we also want to make sure that all of the same organizations, especially those that are large and with large staff, don't take all the money. And we work hard to make sure that our funding is reaching big, small, new, old, and the best projects we can at all times. I think that might be a good breaking point. I know Lian is already answering some questions here in the chat for some of the other things that have come in that haven't been answered yet. But I think we'll pass it over to Becky now to start talking about some of our individual grant lines, and there will be more time for open Q&A at the end.
All right, thanks, Scott. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. I'm going to start with the page that Lian introduced you to. This is our main grants page. So from the top menu here, if you just click on grants, this will bring you to this main page that gives you a little information about Connecticut Humanities. And this is basically an overview of each of our competitive grant lines. The grant lines are listed down the left here, and you can compare the data for the different grant lines, look and see what might be the best fit. So we have sample types of projects, the award size, so how much funding you can request for that line, the project duration, which are typically 12 to 24 months, it'll specify here, matching requirements, which I'll go into more detail in a little bit, application deadlines throughout the year, and the earliest start date for a project after your application deadline. I'm going to start by talking to you about 2 specific grant lines, sponsorships and quick grants. These are grants that are good for newcomers to Connecticut Humanities and to grant writing in general. They have smaller awards with simpler applications, and both have 1-year grant periods. So I'm going to start with sponsorships, which are at the bottom here. And these are all hyperlinked. So if I click on it, it'll bring me to the sponsorship page. And I'm going to kind of do an overview of the page and talk about sponsorships at the same time. So every grant page has a brief summary of what the grant line is, what we're looking for, as well as a little table of contents, which is clickable, so you can navigate through the page. So sponsorships are a newer grant line to Connecticut Humanities that started about 2 years ago. Sponsorships offer up to $2,000 to support public humanities events. In return, awardees provide marketing visibility and exposure for Connecticut Humanities. And the events, the public humanity events is a key term here. Some projects supported by our other grant lines, such as exhibits, are not eligible. Think of the line along the lines of forums, festivals, conferences, and other larger public humanities events. So if we go to the overview, you'll have a brief description of what it is, a reminder of what the humanities are and how it intersects with some other fields, as Lian went over as well. If we go to our guidelines and application page, here are those guidelines that Lian mentioned earlier that everybody should review. If you click on this, it'll open into a separate PDF that'll have all of the guidelines that we update annually. You can also preview an application. It's always right beneath the guidelines. This will open another PDF. It is not the application you'll submit. You have to do that through our portal, but it will give you all of the questions. So you can work on it offline. You can work on it with your colleagues. Another important tab, the funding priorities. For sponsorships, that's a little bit different. The same priorities Lian reviewed apply here, but sponsorships also have their own funding priorities. And I'll read these out loud for everyone. Connecticut Humanities gives priority to sponsorship requests that support events or programs with a large number of attendees or viewership, that support activities that are free or low cost to attend, that provide equitable access to the humanities or professional development opportunities for humanities serving institutions, that support underserved areas of the humanities, such as geographic areas, demographic, or different humanities disciplines. We give priority to requests that support activities that meet the priorities of Connecticut Humanities, but whose structure and scholarship are not fitted for traditional granting programs. So humanities content is still important, but there's not always as much of the scholarship and expertise. Again, for more of the events like a conference where you're bringing people together. And we also give priority to requests that support organizations not recently funded by Connecticut Humanities grants, which I believe was one of the questions that came up in the chat. This is a good grant line to start with, especially if you're new to us. Important dates are on all of the grants, and this is going to give you the deadlines for the year. I know that table that we started with had the months that the deadlines appear, but this will give you the specific dates throughout the year. So our first deadline is actually tomorrow, which is not a good fit for anybody watching this right now, but we do have 3 other deadlines coming up throughout the year. And again, they're the first Friday of the month. So December 1st, March 1st, and June 7th. Sponsorships will be, you'll be notified whether you are awarded or not about a month later. And another important thing about sponsorships that is a little bit different. For the earliest project start date, we ask that ideally it's 2 months following the application deadline, because we're asking for you to provide that marketing visibility and exposure. We ask that you have that lead time to be able to provide that. If you don't have that lead time, make sure you talk about it in your grant application, what you're going to be doing to get that marketing and visibility. So some other important things to know about sponsorships. These awards are paid in a single installment after the sponsorship agreement is completed. So you receive 100% of your award once you've signed the agreement. There is no match or cost share required for sponsorships, which I'll talk about a little bit more with quick grants in a moment. Fiscal sponsorship that Lian was talking about, that is not permitted for sponsorship. So you have to meet one of the eligibility requirements as a 501c3, a municipality, or a federally or state recognized tribe. However, there is no minimum time requirement for how long you have held 501c3 status. All of our other competitive grant lines we're going to talk about today, you have to have your 501c3 status for at least a year, you do not need that for a sponsorship. And we also do not offer draft reviews for sponsorships. This is the one grant line that we don't do draft reviews. So if we continue through the page, there's the apply section, which just reminds you to please contact us, and our email is right here. And there's a link to our portal where if you don't already have an account for your organization, you'll create it, and then you can complete the application just clicking this button. The portal is available on a few different places through the website, but it's on every grants page. We have FAQs on all of our grants pages, and they're just drop-down menus. So if you click on it, it'll expand for you. And we also have resources for recipients of these awards. The next grant line I'm going to talk about is the quick grants, which if you go to our grants menu, you can see on the right column that our grant lines are all listed right here. So I'm going to go to quick grants. And you'll see that the layout is very similar. Quick grants, oops, sorry, I lost my spot for a moment there. Quick grants is a line that offers $4,999 for your projects, which along with the remainder of the grants we'll cover today do require a one-to-one match. So for every dollar you request, you must demonstrate that you are investing another dollar of your own into the project. These funds can be your own cash, in kind through volunteer time and donated site and equipment usage, and through external cash from monetary donations and other grants, so long as those other grants are not state funds. If you are applying to be as a 501c3, as I mentioned, you have to have had your 501c3 status for at least a year. If you do not meet that requirement, you can partner with a fiscal sponsor. We do offer draft reviews, as Lian mentioned. So once you've spoken with a team member and you've started your application, email us to request a review. We work in a queue system, so we'll let you know where in the queue you are. And we'll enter feedback directly into the portal, which is why it's so important that you start your application in the portal. We'll put feedback underneath each question, including the budget, and then we'll contact you again once feedback is ready. And quick grants, along with the rest of the competitive grants that Lian will discuss, are partial reimbursement grants. If awarded, you'll receive 80% of the award once the grant agreement is fully executed, and the remaining 20% after your final report has been submitted and then reviewed and processed by us. The project must be completed and the funds must be spent before filing the final report. So in other words, you have to spend 100% of your award, not just the 80% that you've already received. And a lot of that information is going to be on this page as well. So if we go down to the overview page, it gives just some basic information about what we are looking for, as well as that reminder of what are the humanities and how they intersect with things like arts and STEM. One of the key differences between sponsorships and our other grant pages is the Sample Quick Grants tab. We provide sample grants from successful applications on all of our other competitive lines. They're organized by program type and are downloadable PDFs. So if you open, for example, discussion-based programs, it provides a description of what we're looking for. And then it has a few different PDFs that are linked. They'll just open right in your browser. You can download them. And quick grants can cover a lot of different types of projects. We have exhibitions, tours, public discussions, podcasts, other digital learning tools, and community reading projects. And again, continuing through the tabs, the same guidelines and application preview. Here are the guidelines in this blue box, and the application you can preview. The funding priorities, it'll just link you back to that page that Lian showed you earlier, as well as the important dates. For quick grants this year, our first deadline of the year has passed, but we have 3 more throughout the year because it is a quarterly grant line. November 3rd, February 2nd, and May 3rd are our next deadlines for this fiscal year. Again, the application section with a reminder to contact us and our contact information, FAQs, and resources for quick grants. And Lian is going to now cover our major grants, our bigger grant lines. So Lian.
Maybe Becky, if you can stop sharing screen.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. All right, So I am going to talk about, as Becky said, our larger grant lines. And the first one I'm going to be talking about is capacity grants. So capacity grants are for consultant-led projects up to just under $10,000, our fund number of 9999. And so consultant-led projects that help your organization to bring the humanities to the public more effectively. For this, you do need to have a consultant identified, and you do need to be able to talk about how this is going to specifically help your organization bring humanities to the public. So if you are an organization that does not do humanities work typically, some of the other grant lines might be better fits, and that's something we can certainly talk about. This is one that's really designed more for organizations that primarily, or at least partially, their work is rooted in bringing the humanities to the public. The types of projects that can be funded through capacity are listed here. I will highlight some of the ones that we typically see. We see a lot of strategic planning grants. So if you've identified a consultant that can help you with, a strategic plan for your next 3 years, for example. We also do tend to see interpretive assessments and planning. If you are, for example, a historical society or a museum, and you would like a consultant to come and help you with designing an interpretive plan for maybe a section of your museum, this is another one that we've seen. And then another one that is increasingly more popular is an IDEA assessment planning and training. So if you would like to hire a consultant to help you with, developing an IDEA statement, creating some processes or some policies in place for your organization, and you wanted to have a grant to help pay for the consultant to do that, that this is one possibility. One thing that capacity grants typically don't fund is the purchase of equipment or that type of capacity building. So this is really intended for working with a consultant, for planning, for assessments, that type of thing. As with the other grant lines, we have some sample capacity grants. We have the grant guidelines and a preview of the application. The funding priorities are the same. And then these grants are offered twice a year, once in November and once in April. Unlike the quick grants and the sponsorships, which have notification by the first workday of the following month, capacity grants and the other grants I'll be talking about, the ones that are offered twice a year, take a little bit longer for review and for notification. So if you apply in April, you'll hear in July. And if you apply in November, you'll hear in January. So it's a couple months after your application. And as with the other pages, we have some FAQs and some resources if you've received a grant. If you are interested in this, reach out to us. We can help to recommend some consultants, but typically people will reach out to us having identified maybe a short list of consultants that they would like to work with. So that's something we can certainly talk more about. The last two grants I'm going to be talking about are planning and implementation, and I will do my best to leave ample time for questions as well. So planning and implementation grants come from the same funding pool, which means that you cannot have both at the same time. You do not need to have a planning grant in order to get an implementation grant. And so these are really intended for, as you'll see here, planning for the research development planning phase of a public humanities project, and implementation for the implementing of that project. You do not need to go through both of them, but they are both available to you. So planning grants, as we'll see here, go up to $25,000, and it supports research, planning, development of humanities projects. So what could this look like? This could be, for example, if you were planning an exhibit and you needed to travel for some research, you wanted to put together a focus group, you wanted to include a curriculum development as part of the project, and you needed to reach out to some teachers and provide stipends for them to review the curricula. the planning is really for that development phase before you're ready to open the exhibit or ready to publish your project online or ready to have your speaker series. You know, if there's that research necessary, that's what this planning grant is for. It has all the same elements, so I won't go through them again. All of these grants are matching grants, as Becky talked about with the quick grants. So they can be matched with your organization's funds, with in-kind donations, or with external funds. And so that's something to consider as you look at these larger grants. If you're looking at $25,000, you do need to make sure you have $25,000 of match that's going into the project as well. And then the last one that I will talk through is implementation grants. And implementation grants, let's see, are our biggest grant line in terms of the amount of funding you can receive. They go up to $35,000, and this is for the implementation of a public humanities project. So think of this as kind of the larger version of a quick grant. The quick grant only goes up to $4,999. The implementation grant goes up to $35,000, but they fund the same types of projects, whether that's lectures or discussion series, exhibits, walking tours, that type of thing. So we'll see here that we also have sample grants to kind of help you think through what types of projects might be a good fit. For implementation grants, we have guidelines and a sample of the application. And it is really important that you take a look at the requirements for an implementation grant, as this is our biggest deadline. It has the most requirements as well. So it does require some additional attachments. For example, if you're coming in for an exhibit, if you're coming in for a quick grant, you're really telling us about your exhibit. If you're coming in for an implementation grant, you're going to tell us about your exhibit, but we'll also need things like sample label copy for the wall and some diagrams kind of showing what the exhibit will look like. So it's really important that you take a look at that. And again, in the consult, that's something that we'll highlight and we can help you with and walk you through as well. One really important difference for implementation grants, and something to consider if this is something that appeals to your organization, is that while this is a matching grant, as with all of our other grant lines, there is a percentage of your match that must come from external sources. So by external sources, I mean other donations specifically for this project or other grants that you received for this project. So for example, if you are requesting under $25,000, 25% of your match must come from external sources. So if you're requesting $24,000, $6,000 has to come from other grants or from other donations. If you're requesting over $25,000, 50% has to come from external sources. So as you're considering, what is reasonable to request, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. It's also really important to keep in mind if you're thinking, I want to come in for planning and implementation, saving that external match for when you really need it for the implementation phase. And so again, that's something when you talk to us in the consult, we'll remind you, we'll talk you through that and just make sure that you don't get into a situation where you realize after filling out the whole application that you suddenly need to figure out a plan for external match. But that's a really important thing to highlight for implementation grants. So that's kind of a quick overview of all of our standard grant lines. And I know that there are some questions that have popped in. I think I will maybe give Scott the opportunity to kind of close out, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A, and Becky and I will try to answer your questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, so you can start to put more questions in the chat or raise your hands if you want to ask your question live. I want to be very brief, but I just want to say what a couple of things that are going to be coming. Again, this whole program today was about our core humanities project grant lines. So we're not going in depth in a lot of other areas that we've already talked about. Want to highlight one thing. There will be like a part 2 coming up in October, on October 3rd at noon, also with the Connecticut League. It will be another workshop like this to talk about how to put together strong proposals and kind of tips and suggestions from us as a grants team on being successful grants, not only to us at Connecticut Humanities, but to other funders. Want to highlight a couple of other opportunities that will be coming up. We're not talking about collections assessments today. Collections assessment are a program that we have funded over the last 2 years with parts of the cultural fund money. It's a collaboration between us and the work that Kathy Crowell-Varda does out of the state library and the Conservation Connection program there. That program does have funding for this year, and we'll be accepting applications before the end of again, the fiscal year runs through June 30th. So keep on the lookout for that in the coming months. I encourage, and I'm going to put in the chat here, places to be thinking about our nation's birthday coming up. Our nation is turning 250, if you haven't heard, in 2026. And there is a state commission that is helping the state to figure out how we want to commemorate and talk about where we are as a country, where we've been, where we're going, and we are encouraging organizations to be thinking about doing that as well. I have put the link in the chat here to the state's 250th website. I encourage you all to go and sign up for communications if you're not already receiving them, because I think that sooner rather than later, additional funds will be coming to Connecticut Humanities. We are the state administrative arm of a state commission. We will be helping to distribute funds to get organizations and communities ready to start exploring the 250th. And I don't want to go a lot into this in the 250th talk, but if your site does not interpret a 18th century Revolutionary War era time, that is okay. That's not all that we want to fund. We want to help us talk about where we are as a country, where we're going, the people, our communities, the businesses, the issues that are facing us. And we encourage applications from all types of institutions across the state. And the last thing I will say in terms of other things to be aware of right now is Good to Great. It is another program that we do not run at Connecticut Humanities on our own. It is a partnership we administer on behalf of the state of Connecticut and the Department of Economic and Community Development, Office of the Arts, State Historic Preservation Office, and Office of Tourism. We have just funded a major round of capital projects through the collaboration, and there is hope that this program will come back. We don't know yet if it's going to come back this fiscal year. If not, it'll probably come back next year. The state does it through bond funds, and they have to go before the bond commission to get funding for this. And there is the expectation that probably within the next 12 to 24 months, funding will become available again, and this program will come anew. And this is a great grant line to do physical improvements at your site, buying equipment, but again, with the intent not just of doing deferred maintenance because your place needs a roof, but what are the ways that the state can invest in you to turn your institution, the way you serve the public, from a good level of doing so to a great level of doing so. So I know there are a number of questions that are starting to come up in the chat here. Lian, is there one you want to start with?
Can I just bring us back to a question that did not get answered from a while ago from Catherine? Are new grantees prioritized at all, or those applicants who are not already applicants under multiple lines? So I think this is sort of asking about, like, you know, how you consider people who may be new to CTH grant funds or who may not already be receiving funds from you through another grant line.
Yeah, and we take that one live, but in general, we are trying to make sure that new organizations are not disproportionately reviewed because they don't have a big track record and they don't have full staff like some of the other places. So yes, we are taking all of these things into consideration: new, old, big, small, all volunteer, paid staff, geography, to try to make sure that we are getting our grants in as many places as possible and not putting it all into the biggest places in the big cities.
Great. Sorry if I missed that. I just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost in the shuffle. Do you want to go through these, or do you want me to bring them up for you?
Let's do the first one here, Lian, that you're seeing. We've got, yes, also the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's Farewell Tour next year. Lots of anniversaries coming up. Hartford 400 is coming up too.
Wade had a question about Good to Great. Like, you know, does your nonprofit have to have been around for a certain amount of time to be eligible for that?
I am hesitant to say exactly what the next round of Good to Great is going to be, because this is a program that the state continually makes tweaks on. But yes, they did have some minimum requirements about 501c3 status and things. I'm guessing they will continue to do so. You can see, and we can put the link here to where the guidelines are for the current version of the program. But I just caution saying that just because it was in the guidelines as this time does not mean it's going to be the same for the next time of the program. We currently have a well-researched exhibit on African-American soldiers and local volunteerism, but have had trouble attracting an audience. Is there a grant to help promote an exhibit while partnering with another local nonprofit? I think I'd love to dig a little bit deeper than probably what we're going to be able to talk about here, but just a couple of things that come to mind. And Lian, if you have other answers, or Becky, please jump in. We can work with you on, let's say, a capacity grant to get some feedback about your audience and how they would like to be reached, that may help you give some tips on how you can be marketing and reaching more of the public you're having trouble attracting. For the 250th, there might actually end up starting to be some just dedicated tourism funding coming available, I'm hopeful for, and we would let you know about that. It's an opportunity we're exploring right now with the state. But by and large, I think I want to just dig a little bit deeper here than from what I'm seeing in the question.
I would like to say that if you came in for if you come in for like a quick grant, for example, for other programming like lectures and discussions, promotion is one of the categories that we will fund. So it does need to be attached to public humanities programming, and we would, like Scott said, want to dig deeper into it on your individual project and ideas. But we do fund promotion in relation to public humanities programming. So that is something to keep in mind.
And that's what makes us a little bit different than other grant funders as well. We don't just put up a grant line and say, good luck figuring it out and submitting. We'll talk it through with you. We'll come up with some possibilities, some suggestions. Is this the right grant line, or is there a different grant line that would be better? Or is this just not the right fit for what you're looking for right now? I see some questions being answered in the chat here, so I won't go to the ones that have already been answered. I've got Fuse Theater of CT is interested in creating a body positivity in the arts conference summit kind of event. Whoop. And that's already being answered now too. So Lian is saying email us for that one. Are organizations who have received CTH grants in the past competitive for sponsorship opportunities? Yes and no. I mean, I think we want to make sure that sponsorships are going to meet those needs overall, and trying to make sure that first-time grantees, brand new organizations are not disproportionately affected is a priority there. But depending on what you're doing, I think we should talk about it and figure out. But in the given round, yes, it could be something that gets taken into consideration, and we'll go to a place that we haven't tried before with sponsorship more so than our other grant lines. Where are we located? Well, that is an excellent question. Our physical offices are located in Middletown. We have an office on Main Street in Middletown, but like many of you guys, since the pandemic, we've been a largely hybrid organization, but we have a physical office in Middletown and are happy if you're going to be by there to email us, and maybe we can get together with you in our offices. Just check, because we're not there every day of the week. We are just about 1 o'clock here, so I think I can hang around for a little bit more here and happy to answer other questions. But maybe we should wrap things up. And on behalf of all of us at Connecticut Humanities, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank Amaris and Emily and Connecticut League for hosting us and making this possible. But again, a few of us can hang on. We can, Amaris, any final word you want to say, and then stop recording, and then we can answer some more questions after that.
Well, I just want to thank Scott, Lian, and Becky for all of this helpful information. I think we all look forward to the next program where we'll dig a little bit deeper into what makes a good grant application and how to think about putting your grant proposal together. That's always a specific art, and we always appreciate guidance from the experts on that. I think, I'll just say, there were some questions about the content in the chat. Emily usually does put the chat into the follow-up email, but we'll be certain to do that this time, because I know there was a lot of back and forth around specific questions that was happening there. I just want to thank everyone for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at a future league program. Any closing comments, Emily?
again, just to echo everybody's point, thank you so much for being here, and be on the lookout from us for a follow-up email, which will have the information provided, as well as the recording. There will be a transcript of the chat in there, so you can review past questions, and be on the lookout from us for the upcoming October 3rd grant writing event. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.